MAID lasted with the billionaire's triplets until he found them sleeping next to the Black Maid. Want more stories that feel like they were made just for you? Like, subscribe, and you won't miss a single one. The crystal chandelier trembled, not from an earthquake or settling foundation, but from the pure, unfiltered chaos erupting from the third floor of the Cole mansion. Three voices, each more defiant than the last, pierced through 12,000 square feet of marble floors and mahogany walls like sirens announcing the apocalypse. Jonathan Cole's jaw tightened as his Bentley pulled into the circular driveway. The gala had been a success, 3 new investors secured, a merger finalized, but the victory felt hollow as those familiar screams reached him even through bulletproof glass. Another maid was about to quit. He could feel it in his bones. The mansion's front doors, carved from Italian oak and worth more than most people's homes, stood slightly ajar. A red flag. Jonathan's chest constricted as he stepped inside, his Armani tuxedo still perfect despite the late hour, his face a mask of controlled fury. Toys everywhere. Lego blocks scattered across Persian rugs like colorful landmines. A tricycle overturned in the foyer, its wheels still spinning lazily. Crayon marks streaked the cream-colored walls at precisely the height of 6-year-old hands. The smell of something burning drifted from the kitchen. "Daddy's not here. Daddy's never here." Ethan's voice, the loudest of his 3 sons, echoed from upstairs. Jonathan's hands clenched into fists. 2 years. 2 years since Rebecca died, and still his children raged against the world like tiny hurricanes, destroying everything in their path. Where is she? Jonathan's voice cut through the chaos as he climbed the marble staircase, each step echoing like a gunshot. Where's the maid? Silence answered him. Then, from the master bedroom, his sanctuary, the one room that had remained untouched since Rebecca's death, came the sound of muffled sobbing. Jonathan's blood turned to ice. He pushed open the door to find chaos incarnate. Noah, his quiet middle son, had somehow climbed onto the 4-poster bed and was jumping with wild abandon, his dark curls bouncing with each leap. Ethan stood on the antique dresser, hurling pillows across the room like grenades. And Logan, the baby of the 3 by mere minutes, sat in the corner wailing with the intensity of a fire alarm, his face red and streaked with tears and what looked suspiciously like chocolate. On the floor, hunched beside the bed with her head in her hands, sat Mrs. Patterson, maid number 17 in 24 months. "I can't," she sobbed, not even looking up at Jonathan's imposing figure in the doorway. "I can't do this anymore, Mr. Cole. They're impossible. They're there. Get out." The words exploded from Jonathan's chest with such force that even the boys stopped their destruction. Mrs. Patterson scrambled to her feet, her gray uniform wrinkled and stained, her hair escaping its neat bun like she'd been through a tornado. "Sir, I'm so sorry, but they wouldn't listen, and they got into your room, and I tried to stop them, but out. Now." Mrs. Patterson fled, her sensible shoes clicking against marble as she disappeared down the hallway. The front door slammed moments later, leaving Jonathan alone with his 3 sons in the wreckage of his bedroom, Rebecca's bedroom. The boys stared at their father with wide eyes, suddenly aware they had crossed a line that had never been crossed before. The master bedroom had been off-limits since their mother's death. Sacred, untouchable. Jonathan's voice, when it came, was quiet, deadly. "No one, in '01, is ever to mention hiring another maid again. Do you understand me?" But as he surveyed the devastation, Rebecca's perfume bottles knocked over, her jewelry scattered, her pillow torn and leaking feathers like snow, Jonathan Cole felt something crack inside his chest. Not break, just crack, like ice before it shatters completely. The boys said nothing. They just stared, 3 pairs of dark eyes so much like their mother's, so much like his own, filled with a confusion and hurt that no 6-year-old should carry. Jonathan turned and walked out, closing the door behind him with a soft click that somehow sounded louder than any slam. Monday night bled into Tuesday morning with all the grace of a car accident. Jonathan hadn't slept. How could he? The house felt different now that his sanctuary had been breached. He'd spent the dark hours in his office, staring at financial reports that blurred together into meaningless numbers, trying not to think about the mess upstairs, trying not to think about Rebecca's things scattered like confetti across their bedroom floor. At 6 a.m., He forced himself upstairs to survey the damage. But as he approached the master bedroom, something made him pause. The silence. In a house with 3 6-year-olds, silence was never a good sign. It usually meant they were plotting something catastrophic or had already executed it. Jonathan's hand froze on the doorknob. What if they'd hurt themselves? What if in his anger, his demand for them to stay in the room, He pushed open the door and his heart stopped. The room looked exactly as destroyed as he'd left it. Pillows still on the floor, jewelry still scattered, that tear in Rebecca's pillow still weeping white feathers. But there, in the center of his king-sized bed, the bed he hadn't slept in for 2 years, was something impossible. Peace. All 3 boys lay fast asleep, their small bodies arranged like flower petals around a sleeping figure in the center. A young woman in a simple black uniform, her dark skin smooth and untroubled in sleep, her arms extended protectively over the children like a mother bird sheltering her chicks. Jonathan blinked hard, certain he was hallucinating from exhaustion. But no, there she was, a stranger in his house, in his bed, cradling his children like they belonged to her. His first instinct was rage. How dare someone, anyone, be in this room? How had she gotten past security? Who was she? But then Ethan shifted in his sleep, unconsciously burrowing deeper into the woman's side, and something in Jonathan's chest clenched tight. When was the last time his boys had looked so peaceful? When was the last time they'd slept without tears or tantrums or demands for daddy to come home? The woman's eyes fluttered open, warm brown eyes that reminded him of coffee with cream, and met his. For a moment, neither moved. She took in his expensive suit, his stern expression, the way his hands clenched at his sides. "I'm sorry," she whispered, careful not to wake the boys. "They were so upset, and I couldn't leave them crying." Her voice held a trace of something, an accent he couldn't place, soft and musical. She started to sit up, but Logan's small hand clutched at her uniform, even in sleep refusing to let her go. "Who are you?" Jonathan's voice was barely a whisper, but it carried all the authority of a man used to having answers immediately. "Nyla Washington." She carefully extracted herself from the tangle of small limbs, sliding off the bed with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to not waking sleeping children. "I work for Sunshine Catering." "Well worked. I was filling in for my cousin yesterday, the event at the Morrison house. But there was a mix-up with the schedules and—" "You're not a maid." It wasn't a question. "No, sir. I'm not anything, really. Just someone who was in the right place at the wrong time." She smoothed down her uniform, borrowed, Jonathan realized, probably her cousin's, and glanced back at the boys. They were so scared last night. The lady who was watching them. She left so fast, and they were crying and calling for you. But you weren't here, and She trailed off, seeming to realize she was explaining herself to a man who probably didn't care about explanations. But Jonathan found himself leaning forward slightly, drawn into her story despite himself. "You just what?" "I made them pancakes." She said it like it was obvious, like feeding 3 strange children in a mansion was the most natural thing in the world. "Mickey Mouse pancakes. And we cleaned up the kitchen afterward, and they showed me their rooms, and they told me about their mama." Jonathan's jaw tightened at the mention of Rebecca. "They shouldn't have. She sounds like she was wonderful." Nyla's voice was gentle but firm. "They miss her. They miss you too." The words hit Jonathan like a physical blow. He opened his mouth to respond, to defend himself, to explain that he worked 18-hour days to provide for them, that building an empire wasn't a 9-to-5 job. But Logan chose that moment to stir. "Nyla." The little boy's voice was thick with sleep and something else, hope. "You're still here." "I'm here, baby." Her voice transformed, becoming impossibly warm and soft. "But you need to sleep a little more, okay? The sun's barely up. Will you be here when I wake up for real?" Jonathan watched his son, his strong, stubborn, impossible son, look at this stranger with more trust than he'd shown any of the 17 maids who'd come before her. More trust than he'd shown his own father in months. "I don't know," Nyla answered honestly, glancing at Jonathan. "That's up to your daddy." 3 pairs of dark eyes turned to Jonathan then. Logan's hopeful, Ethan's defiant even in sleepiness, and Noah's quietly watching, always watching. And suddenly Jonathan understood that this moment would change everything. He could send her away. He could call security, demand explanations, restore order to his disrupted world. He could pretend that finding his children sleeping peacefully for the first time in 2 years meant nothing. Or he could take the biggest risk of his carefully controlled life. The boys need breakfast, he heard himself say. Can you make Mickey Mouse pancakes again? Nyla's smile could have powered the entire mansion. By 7:30 a.m., the Cole mansion had transformed into something Jonathan didn't recognize, something that sounded suspiciously like a home. The kitchen, usually pristine and unused except by the rotating staff who came and went like seasons, bubbled with activity. Nyla moved with practiced efficiency, mixing batter while simultaneously helping Noah tie his shoes and redirecting Ethan from climbing onto the marble countertops. Mickey needs ears, Logan announced solemnly, perched on a bar stool that made him look impossibly small. Big ears. Mama used to make the ears really big. Jonathan tensed at the mention of Rebecca, but Nyla just nodded seriously. Big ears coming up. But you know what Mickey needs most? She poured batter onto the griddle with artistic precision. He needs helpers to set the table. Think you boys can handle that? What followed was organized chaos. The triplets scattered like marbles, each grabbing plates and cups and napkins with the enthusiasm of children given an important mission. Jonathan found himself pressed against the kitchen doorway, mesmerized by the scene unfolding before him. When had his boys last smiled like this? When had they last worked together instead of against each other? Mr. Cole, Nyla's voice cut through his thoughts. Coffee? You look like you could use some. She was right. He looked like hell, his tuxedo wrinkled from the sleepless night, his usually perfect hair disheveled, his 5 o'clock shadow approaching noon territory. But somehow, in this kitchen filled with his laughing children, he felt more awake than he had in months. Black. 2 sugars. He accepted the mug she offered, noting how she'd somehow intuited exactly how he liked it. How did you? Lucky guess. But her eyes twinkled with mischief. Or maybe I noticed the empty coffee cups in your office when I was looking for you last night. You went into my office. The question came out sharper than he intended, and he saw Nyla's shoulders stiffen slightly. The boys were scared. They kept saying their daddy was home, but they couldn't find you. I was just trying to. She trailed off, then squared her shoulders. I'm sorry if I overstepped. Before Jonathan could respond, chaos erupted at the breakfast table. That's my plate. Ethan's voice rose to its familiar shriek. Noah took my plate. I didn't take anything. Noah shot back, his quiet voice cracking with indignation. It was right here. Boys. Jonathan's command voice cut through the argument like a blade. All 3 children froze, their faces falling into the familiar masks of fear and resentment that had become their default around him. But then Nyla moved, smooth as water, sliding between Jonathan and the boys with a grace that diffused the tension before it could escalate. Ethan, honey, look here. She knelt beside his chair, her voice gentle but firm. What color is your plate? Blue. Ethan mumbled, his dark eyes still darting nervously to his father. And what color is Noah's plate? Green. So if your plate is blue, and Noah's plate is green, and you're both holding blue plates. She let the logic sink in, watching understanding dawn on Ethan's face. We both have blue plates. Exactly. Which means, there was a mix-up? Ethan's voice was small, uncertain. There was a mix-up. No one stole anything. No one did anything wrong. Sometimes things just get confusing, especially when we're excited about Mickey Mouse pancakes. Jonathan watched this exchange with something approaching awe. In 30 seconds, Nyla had defused a situation that would have normally resulted in tears, screaming, and at least one broken dish. She hadn't raised her voice, hadn't threatened punishment, hadn't demanded immediate obedience. She'd just listened. And somehow, that had been enough. Here we go, Nyla announced, sliding perfect Mickey Mouse pancakes onto each boy's plate. 1 Mickey for Noah, 1 for Logan, and 1 for Ethan. And look, they all have extra big ears, just like Logan requested. The boys dove into their breakfast with enthusiasm that would have been heartwarming if Jonathan wasn't so bewildered by the entire scene. This wasn't how mornings worked in the Cole mansion. Mornings were battles, getting dressed, eating breakfast, preparing for school or nanny time. They weren't joyful. Nyla, Logan said around a mouthful of pancake. Will you take us to school today? Jonathan started to object. Nyla wasn't their nanny, wasn't even supposed to be here, but she was already shaking her head gently. I don't know about that, sweetheart. That's something your daddy would have to decide. 3 pairs of hopeful eyes turned to Jonathan, and he felt the familiar weight of their expectations, their disappointment in advance. He thought of his schedule, back-to-back meetings until noon, a conference call with Tokyo, the Henderson merger paperwork that needed his attention. He thought of the 17 maids who had walked away from his children in defeat. He thought of finding them asleep this morning, peaceful for the first time in 2 years. "I'll call the school," he heard himself say. "Let them know you'll be dropping them off." The explosion of joy from his sons was immediate and overwhelming. They launched themselves from their chairs, pancakes forgotten, surrounding Nyla with hugs and cheers and promises to be good, to listen, to not make trouble. Over their heads, Nyla's eyes met Jonathan's, and in them he saw surprise, gratitude, and something else. A challenge, maybe. As if she was saying, "Okay, billionaire. Let's see what you're really made of." Jonathan Cole had built an empire by never backing down from a challenge. But something told him this might be the biggest gamble of his life. By Thursday morning, battle lines had been drawn. On one side, Jonathan Cole, master of the universe, commander of boardrooms, and a man who had built his fortune on order, control, and the absolute certainty that every problem had a solution. You just had to find the right pressure point and apply leverage. On the other side, Nyla Washington, a woman who had stumbled into his life by accident and proceeded to turn everything he thought he knew about parenting, discipline, and basic household management completely upside down. The first skirmish had been over schedules. They need structure. Jonathan had insisted Tuesday evening, cornering Nyla in the kitchen while the boys played in the family room. Actually played, together, without screaming or breaking anything. Bedtime is 8 p.m. sharp. Dinner at 6. Homework from 4 to 5:30. Nyla had listened with the patience of someone humoring a well-meaning but hopelessly out-of-touch parent. Then she'd smiled that smile that was starting to drive him absolutely crazy. "Structure is good," she'd agreed. "But maybe we could try flexible structure?" "There's no such thing as flexible structure." "Sure there is. Like, what if bedtime is when they're actually tired instead of when the clock says they should be tired? What if homework happens when they can focus instead of between 4 and 5:30 whether they're having a good day or a bad day?" Jonathan had stared at her like she'd suggested they let the boys drive the Bentley to school. The second skirmish had been over television. Jonathan had rules about screen time. 30 minutes of educational programming after homework was completed satisfactorily. No exceptions. He'd walked into the family room Wednesday evening to find all 4 of them, Nyla and his 3 sons, sprawled across the oversized sectional, watching some animated movie about a fish, sharing a bowl of popcorn like they were at a drive-in theater. "It's past their screen time," he'd announced, reaching for the remote. "Daddy, no," Logan had wailed. "Nemo's dad is about to find him. The rules are the rules." "But rules can be bent sometimes," Nyla had said softly, not taking her eyes off the screen. "Especially when they're learning something. They're learning about fish. They're learning about love. About not giving up on family. About how far a parent will go to protect their child." She'd finally looked at him then, her brown eyes steady and knowing. "Important lessons, don't you think?" Jonathan had stood there, remote in hand, feeling like the villain in his own home. The boys had watched him with a mixture of hope and resignation, already bracing for disappointment. Nyla had waited, patient as stone, letting him decide whether to be the ogre or the hero. He'd put down the remote and left the room. But the third skirmish, Thursday morning's disaster, that was the one that nearly broke everything. Jonathan had been on a call with investors in London when the screaming started. Not the usual childhood chaos, but something deeper, more primal. The sound of a child in genuine distress. He'd burst into the kitchen to find Noah sobbing hysterically, his small body shaking with the force of his tears, while Ethan and Logan watched with wide, frightened eyes. Nyla knelt beside Noah, her hands gentle on his shoulders, her voice low and soothing. "What happened?" Jonathan's voice cut through the scene like a knife. "He's okay," Nyla said immediately. "He just had a little accident with." "I broke Mama's cup." Noah's wail was heartbreaking. "I broke Mama's special cup." Jonathan's blood turned to ice. Rebecca's mug, the handmade ceramic piece she'd bought on their honeymoon in Italy, the one with the chipped handle she'd refused to throw away, the one Jonathan had preserved like a shrine in the highest cabinet, untouchable, sacred. On the floor lay the pieces, scattered like his heart. The silence that followed was deafening. Even Noah's sobs had quieted to hiccups as he sensed the change in atmosphere, the way his father's face had gone completely blank. I told you. Jonathan's voice was deadly quiet. I told you nothing in this house was to be touched. Nothing that was hers. It was an accident, Nyla said firmly, rising to her feet, but keeping one protective hand on Noah's shoulder. He was trying to help me reach the coffee filters, and the step stool slipped, and there are rules in this house. Each word fell like a hammer blow. There are things that are off limits. He's 6 years old. I don't care if he's 60. Some things are not to be touched. Ever. The boys were silent now, watching their father transform back into the cold, distant figure they'd grown accustomed to over the past 2 years. Nyla's jaw tightened, and Jonathan saw something flash in her eyes. Anger, maybe, or disappointment. So what now, she asked. You're going to punish a little boy for an accident? You're going to make him feel worse than he already does. I'm going to restore order to this house. Your house doesn't need order. It needs life. The words hung between them like a thrown gauntlet. Jonathan felt his control slipping, felt the careful walls he'd built around his grief and anger starting to crumble under the weight of her steady gaze. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. Nyla's voice was quiet but firm. I understand that you're scared. I understand that letting go of her things feels like letting go of her. But those boys, they're not museum pieces to be preserved and protected from life. They're children who need their father to choose them over his grief. The silence that followed was broken only by Noah's quiet sniffling. Jonathan looked at his son, really looked at him, and saw not a destroyer of sacred things, but a little boy who'd been trying to help, trying to reach something too high, trying to be useful in a house where he'd been made to feel like a burden. The weight of that realization nearly drove him to his knees. Clean it up, he said finally, his voice hoarse. Both of you, clean it up, and we'll talk about this later. He turned and walked out, not trusting himself to stay, not trusting himself to look at the broken pieces of his wife's memory scattered across the kitchen floor. But as he reached the hallway, he heard Nyla's voice, soft and certain. It's okay, baby. We'll clean it up together. And you know what? I bet your mama would much rather have had you use her special cup to help someone than have it sit empty on a shelf forever. Jonathan stopped walking, because somehow, impossibly, he knew Nyla was right. Friday brought consequences. Jonathan should have seen them coming. In business, every action created ripples, and those ripples eventually became waves. He'd built his empire on predicting and controlling those waves, but somehow he'd forgotten that the same principles applied to his personal life. The first wave hit at 9 a.m., in the form of a phone call from Margaret Cole, his mother. Jonathan. Her voice could freeze champagne. We need to talk. 20 minutes later, she swept into his office like a perfectly coiffed hurricane, her Chanel suit armor-bright, her disapproval radiating from every carefully maintained pore. Mother. He didn't look up from his computer. What brings you by? As if you don't know. Margaret settled into the chair across from his desk with the precision of a queen claiming a throne. Vivian Morrison called me this morning. Apparently, there was quite a scene at Tuesday's charity luncheon. Jonathan's fingers stilled on the keyboard. The Morrison luncheon, where Nyla had been working, where this scheduling mix-up had brought her into his life. What kind of scene? The kind where the hired help abandons their post to play house with someone else's children. Margaret's tone could have stripped paint. Really, Jonathan, what were you thinking? I was thinking my children needed care, and she provided it. She's a caterer, not a nanny. And more importantly, Margaret leaned forward, her voice dropping to the whisper she used when delivering her most devastating blows. She's not one of us. There it was. The thing they'd been dancing around. The elephant that had been sitting in the corner of every room since Tuesday morning. What exactly are you saying, Mother? I'm saying that the Cole family has a reputation to maintain, standards to uphold, and parading around with somewhat. Jonathan's voice was dangerously quiet. Margaret's lips thinned. Some girl who doesn't understand her place. The rage that filled Jonathan was white-hot and immediate. He'd felt it before, this protective fury, but never directed at his own mother. Her place, he repeated softly. Don't be naive, darling. She's clearly using the children to get close to you, to improve her situation. It's the oldest story in the world. Poor girl, rich man, innocent children caught in the middle. You don't know what you're talking about, don't I? Margaret reached into her Hermes bag and pulled out a tablet, swiping to reveal what looked like a gossip blog. Because according to Social Scene Daily, you've been cavorting with the help and confusing your children with inappropriate attachments to temporary staff. Jonathan's blood turned to ice as he read the headline. Billionaire's new nanny. Love connection or desperate publicity stunt. The article was pure poison, complete with grainy photographs of Nyla walking the boys to school, holding Logan's hand, laughing at something Ethan had said. In the twisted lens of the gossip machine, every innocent moment looked calculated, every smile seemed manipulative. This is ridiculous, Jonathan said, but his voice lacked conviction. Because he could see how it looked, how quickly he'd trusted her, how completely he'd let her into their lives. Is it? Margaret's voice was gentle now, which somehow made it worse. Jonathan, you're vulnerable right now. You have been since Rebecca died. And that makes you a target for exactly this kind of opportunist. She's not an opportunist. Then what is she? What do you actually know about this woman? Her background, her education, her intentions? The questions hit like physical blows because Jonathan realized he didn't have answers. He knew Nyla made Mickey Mouse pancakes and that his children slept peacefully when she was around. He knew she had a laugh that sounded like music and eyes that saw straight through his carefully constructed walls. But he didn't know where she'd gone to school, or if she'd been married, or what her dreams were, or whether his mother was right about her motivations. The second wave hit at lunch. Jonathan was picking at a sandwich in his office when his assistant buzzed through. Mr. Cole, there's a woman here to see you. Says it's about the children. Nyla appeared in his doorway moments later, but she wasn't the calm, confident woman who'd been turning his world upside down all week. Her face was flushed, her hands trembling slightly, her usual composure cracked down the middle. We need to talk, she said without preamble. Close the door. She did, then turned to face him with the expression of someone steeling themselves for battle. I got a call this morning. From Mrs. Morrison. Nyla's voice was steady, but Jonathan could see the effort it was costing her. Apparently, there's been some confusion about my employment status. What kind of confusion? The kind where she thinks I abandoned my catering duties to seduce you through your children. Nyla's laugh was bitter. The kind where she's threatening to sue me for breach of contract and make sure I never work another event in this city. Jonathan's chest tightened. That's not. Oh, it gets better. Nyla pulled out her phone, swiping to show him the same gossip article his mother had shown him hours earlier. Apparently, I'm either a gold-digging opportunist or a publicity-seeking social climber, depending on which comment thread you read. She sank into the chair across from his desk, suddenly looking exhausted. I never asked for this, she said quietly. I just wanted to help 3 little boys who were scared and sad and missing their mama. I never wanted to be anyone's scandal. Jonathan studied her face, searching for signs of deception, for the calculating ambition his mother insisted he'd find. But all he saw was hurt and determination, and something that looked suspiciously like genuine care for his children. What do you want to do? He asked. I want to quit. The words came out flat, matter of fact. I want to walk away before this gets any worse, before your reputation gets dragged down, before those boys get hurt by something that has nothing to do with them. And if I don't want you to quit. Nyla's smile was sad and knowing. With respect, Mr. Cole, it's not really up to you. Your mother made that pretty clear when she showed up at my apartment this morning. Jonathan's hands clenched into fists. She did what? She offered me money. Quite a lot of money, actually. To disappear quietly, to never contact you or the boys again. Nyla's voice was steady, but he could see the hurt beneath the surface. She said it would be better for everyone involved. The rage Jonathan had felt earlier paled compared to what filled him now. His own mother, showing up at Nyla's home, treating her like some kind of extortionist to be paid off and dismissed. What did you tell her? I told her she could keep her money. Nyla stood, smoothing down her simple dress. But I also realized she was right about one thing. This situation isn't fair to anyone, especially the boys. They don't need to be caught in the middle of whatever this is. She moved toward the door, then paused, her hand on the handle. For what it's worth, she said without turning around. These have been the best 4 days I've had in a very long time. Your sons are remarkable, Mr. Cole. Don't let anyone, including yourself, convince you otherwise. And then she was gone, leaving Jonathan alone with the wreckage of his carefully ordered world and the terrible realization that losing her felt like losing something precious he'd never even known he wanted. The third wave was waiting for him at home. Jonathan walked through his front door at 6 p.m. to find chaos reigning supreme once again. But this wasn't the joyful chaos of pancake breakfasts and movie nights. This was the old chaos, the destructive kind that had driven away 17 maids and left his children isolated in their own hurt and confusion. "Where is she?" Ethan's voice carried from the kitchen, high and desperate. "Where's Nyla?" Jonathan found all three boys in the family room, tear-streaked and furious, surrounded by the newest casualty in the ongoing war against his household staff. Mrs. Henderson, a stern woman with gray hair and no apparent patience for children who asked questions. "Your father expressly forbade any mention of that woman," Mrs. Henderson was saying, her voice sharp with disapproval. "Now, finish your vegetables and prepare for bath time." "I don't want vegetables," Logan screamed, launching his plate across the room. "I want Nyla. She made us Mickey Mouse pancakes," Noah whispered, his voice thick with tears. "She said she'd teach us to make them ourselves." Jonathan stood in the doorway, watching his children fall apart, watching Mrs. Henderson handle them with all the warmth of a prison warden, and felt something inside him snap into crystal-clear focus. His mother was wrong. The gossips were wrong. Hell, maybe even Nyla was wrong. Because looking at his sons, really looking at them, he could see the difference 4 days had made. The way they'd started laughing again, the way they'd begun talking about their mother without dissolving into tears, the way they'd looked at him with hope instead of resignation. Nyla hadn't been using his children. She'd been saving them. And if he let her walk away now, if he let fear and other people's opinions dictate his choices, he'd be making the biggest mistake of his life. Jonathan pulled out his phone and dialed her number. It went straight to voicemail. Finding someone who didn't want to be found should have been simple for a man with Jonathan Cole's resources. Private investigators, corporate security teams, the kind of connections that money and power could buy. All of it should have led him straight to Nyla Washington's doorstep within hours. But Nyla, it turned out, was remarkably good at disappearing. Saturday morning brought only dead ends. The apartment address his mother had visited was a studio in a rundown complex across town, but the landlord said she'd moved out Friday afternoon, paid her lease in full, left no forwarding address. Her phone number led to a disconnected line. The catering company claimed they had no record of a Nyla Washington, just a temporary fill-in who'd been paid cash for one shift. Even her supposed cousin had vanished from their employee roster. By Saturday evening, Jonathan was forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. Nyla had erased herself from his world as thoroughly as if she'd never existed at all. The boys were inconsolable. She said she wouldn't leave, Logan whispered that night, curled up in Jonathan's lap, the first physical affection his youngest son had sought from him in months. She promised she'd teach me to make pancakes. Maybe she had to go help other kids, Noah offered quietly, always the peacemaker. Like how doctors have to help other sick people. But we need help too, Ethan said fiercely, his small fists clenched. We need her. Jonathan held his sons closer, breathing in the scent of their shampoo, feeling their small bodies warm against his chest. When was the last time they'd come to him for comfort? When was the last time he'd been available to give it? "I know you do," he murmured into Logan's hair. "I need her too." The admission slipped out before he could stop it, but it felt like the first honest thing he'd said in days. Sunday brought revelation in the form of Maria Santos. Jonathan had been pacing his office, making his fourth round of calls to private investigators, when his housekeeper knocked tentatively on the door. "Mr. Cole." Maria's English was careful, accented with the musical cadence of her native El Salvador. I think I know where she is." Jonathan's head snapped up. "Where?" "The community center. On Maple Street, in the old neighborhood." Maria twisted her hands nervously. "My daughter Rosa, she volunteers there sometimes. Teaching kids to read, helping with homework. She saw Miss Nyla there yesterday." 20 minutes later, Jonathan stood outside the Maple Street Community Center, a converted warehouse in a part of town his GPS had warned him about twice. The building was old but well-maintained, its brick walls covered in colorful murals painted by local children. Through the windows, he could see a dozen kids of various ages gathered around tables, heads bent over books and homework assignments. And there, in the center of it all, sat Nyla. She looked different here. Smaller somehow, in jeans and a simple sweater instead of the borrowed maid's uniform. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and she wore no makeup, but she glowed with the same warmth that had transformed his sterile mansion into something resembling a home. Jonathan watched her help a little girl sound out words in a picture book, watched her high-five a teenage boy who'd successfully completed a math problem, watched her bandage a scraped knee with the patience of someone who understood that small hurts needed big attention. This was who she really was. Not a gold digger or an opportunist, but someone who spent her Sundays helping kids who had nowhere else to go. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He was about to push through the doors when a hand landed on his shoulder. "You sure you want to do this?" Jonathan turned to find a man about his own age, African-American, wearing jeans and a community center t-shirt. His expression was polite but wary, the look of someone prepared to defend his territory. "I'm looking for Nyla Washington." "I figured. You're the billionaire." It wasn't a question. The man's eyes swept over Jonathan's expensive clothes, his perfectly styled hair, his posture that screamed money and power. "Marcus Williams. I run this place." "Is she here?" "She's here." "Question is, why are you?" Jonathan studied the man's face, seeing protective concern there, the kind of loyalty that couldn't be bought. "She's been taking care of my children. And now she's not." Funny how that works out, isn't it? Rich man gets what he needs, then moves on when things get complicated. The accusation stung because it was partially true. Jonathan had let Nyla walk away. He'd let his mother's poisonous assumptions and society's ugly gossip drive away the first person who'd brought real joy to his children in 2 years. It wasn't like that. No? Then what was it like? Jonathan looked through the window again, watching Nyla laugh at something one of the kids had said. The sound carried even through the glass, warm and infectious and absolutely genuine. "It was like finding something I didn't know I'd lost," he said quietly, "and being too much of a coward to fight for it." Marcus studied him for a long moment, then nodded toward a bench outside the center. "She told me about your boys," Marcus said as they sat down. "How scared they were, how lost. How they lit up when someone finally paid attention to them instead of trying to control them." "She told you about my children?" "She tells me about all the kids she worries about." That's who Nyla is. She collects strays, broken things, people who need fixing. Marcus's smile was fond. "Been doing it since we were kids ourselves." "You've known her long?" 20 years. "We grew up in the same neighborhood, went to the same schools." "Well, when we could afford to go." Marcus's expression grew serious. "Nyla could have done anything with her life, you know. Full scholarship to college, offers from fancy companies. But she chose to stay here, to help kids like the ones we used to be." Jonathan felt something twist in his chest. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because she's been crying for 3 days straight, and Nyla Washington doesn't cry. Not when her mama died. Not when she lost her job at the school district. Not when her fiancé decided she wasn't ambitious enough for his political career." Marcus fixed Jonathan with a steady stare. "But losing your boys? That broke something in her." The words hit Jonathan like a freight train. Fiancé, political career, a whole life he'd never asked about, never bothered to learn. She was engaged? 2 years ago. Nice guy, or so we thought. State senator, big plans for his future. Right up until he decided that marrying someone who spent her weekends in community centers instead of country clubs might hurt his image. The parallel wasn't lost on Jonathan. Another powerful man who'd let other people's opinions matter more than what was real and precious and right in front of him. "Is that what she thinks I'm doing? What do you think?" Before Jonathan could answer, the community center doors opened and children began streaming out, chattering and laughing as they headed home or to waiting parents. Nyla emerged last, her purse slung over her shoulder, her eyes focused on the ground. She looked up and saw Jonathan sitting on the bench. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Nyla's expression hardened, and she started walking in the opposite direction. "Nyla, wait." Jonathan rose quickly, his long strides catching up to her easily. "Please, just let me talk to you." "There's nothing to talk about." Her voice was steady, but he could see the hurt beneath the surface. "You made your choice. Your mother made it pretty clear what your family thinks of people like me. My mother doesn't speak for me." "Doesn't she?" Nyla stopped walking, turning to face him with fire in her eyes. "Because it sure seemed like she did when you let her run me off without a word of protest. I tried to call you. You tried to call me after I was already gone. After you let them paint me as some kind of predator in the gossip blogs. After you let your boys think I abandoned them. Her voice cracked slightly on the last words. Do you have any idea how much that hurt them? Jonathan felt the shame hit him like a physical blow. I know I handled it badly. You handled it like I was a problem to be managed instead of a person who cared about your children. Nyla's eyes were bright with unshed tears. I spent 4 days watching those boys come alive again. I watched them laugh and play and trust. And then you let the world convince you it was all fake. I never thought it was fake. Then why didn't you fight for it? The question hung between them like a challenge. Jonathan thought of all his easy answers, his reputation, his business, his mother's concerns. But looking at Nyla's face, seeing the genuine pain there, those answers felt hollow and cowardly. Because I was scared, he said finally. Because you made me feel things I haven't felt since Rebecca died, and that terrified me. Because my boys loved you more in 4 days than they've loved anyone in 2 years, and I didn't know how to handle that. Nyla's expression softened slightly, but her guard remained up. So you decided it was easier to let me go. I decided I was protecting them. Protecting all of us. Jonathan ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every line of his body. I was wrong. Yes, you were. The boys miss you. They've been asking for you every day, crying themselves to sleep, refusing to eat anything that isn't Mickey Mouse pancakes. He took a step closer, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. They're not the only ones missing you. Nyla's breath caught, but she didn't move away. Jonathan, I know I don't deserve another chance. I know I let you down in the worst possible way. But those boys need you, Nyla. I need you. Not as a maid or a nanny or whatever title makes it acceptable to everyone else. I need you as you. As what exactly? Her voice was soft but steady. As the woman who's good enough to love your children but not good enough to be seen with you in public? As someone you can call when it's convenient but dismiss when it gets complicated? Jonathan felt the weight of her words, the truth in them. He thought of the gossip articles, his mother's visit, the way he'd let other people's opinions matter more than what was happening in his own home. As the woman I'm falling in love with, he said quietly. The words seemed to surprise them both. Nyla's eyes widened, and Jonathan realized he'd never intended to say them, had barely admitted the truth to himself. But there it was, hanging in the air between them. Real and terrifying and absolutely true. Don't, Nyla whispered. Don't say things like that unless you mean them. I mean them. Jonathan took another step closer, his voice gaining strength. I mean them, and I'm sorry it took losing you to figure it out. I'm sorry I let fear make my decisions instead of love. Your mother. My mother doesn't get a vote in this. Neither does the gossip press or high society or anyone else who thinks they know what's best for my family. Jonathan's voice was firm now, certain. My boys need their father to choose them over his reputation. They need someone who loves them unconditionally. They need you. And what do you need? The question was barely a whisper. Jonathan reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his hands. Her skin was soft and warm, and when she didn't flinch from his touch, something in his chest loosened for the first time in days. I need the woman who made my children laugh again. I need the person who saw through all my walls and defenses and loved my boys anyway. I need someone who isn't afraid to call me out when I'm being an idiot. His thumb traced along her cheekbone, wiping away a tear she probably didn't realize had fallen. I need you, Nyla. Not despite who you are, but because of who you are. For a long moment, they stood there in the fading afternoon light, the noise of the city distant around them. Then Nyla placed her hands over his, her fingers warm against his skin. If we do this, she said softly, it has to be real. No more running when things get difficult. No more letting other people decide what's right for us. No more running, Jonathan agreed. And your boys come first. Always. Before your business, before society expectations, before everything else. They already do. You taught me that. Nyla searched his face, looking for signs of deception or doubt. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, because she smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from her since Friday morning. Okay, she said. Let's go home. The mansion felt different when they walked through the front door together. It wasn't the oppressive silence that had greeted Jonathan for 2 years, or even the controlled quiet of well-behaved children under strict supervision. This was expectant silence, the kind that came before surprises or thunderstorms. Where are they? Nyla asked, looking around the empty foyer. Before Jonathan could answer, A crash echoed from the kitchen, followed by Mrs. Henderson's sharp voice. "Boys, get down from there this instant." They found the aftermath in what had once been Jonathan's pristine kitchen. Logan was standing on the marble counter, reaching for something in the highest cabinet. Noah sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by pots and pans he'd apparently pulled from various drawers. Ethan had somehow climbed onto the refrigerator and was perched there like a very angry, very small gargoyle. Mrs. Henderson stood in the center of the chaos, her face red with frustration, a wooden spoon clutched in one hand like a weapon. "Mr. Cole," she gasped when she saw him. "Thank goodness you're home. They've been completely unmanageable since Friday. I've never seen such behavior from children their age." "What are they doing?" Jonathan asked, though part of him already knew. "They said," Mrs. Henderson's voice rose to match the pitch of someone truly at the end of their rope. "They said they were making Mickey Mouse pancakes. They've destroyed half the kitchen looking for the right pan." Jonathan felt Nyla's hand slip into his, her fingers warm and steady. He looked at his sons, really looked at them, and saw not destruction but determination. Not defiance but desperation. They were trying to bring her back the only way they knew how. "Boys," Jonathan said quietly. 3 pairs of dark eyes turned to him, and in them he saw a mixture of guilt, hope, and stubborn resolve that reminded him so strongly of Rebecca that his chest tightened. "We were making pancakes," Logan said, his voice small but defiant. "For when Nyla comes back." "She said she'd teach us," Noah added. "She promised." Ethan, still perched on top of the refrigerator, glared down at the adults. "You made her go away." "Mr. Cole, I really must insist," Mrs. Henderson began. "Mrs. Henderson." Jonathan's voice was gentle but firm. "You can go. I'll handle this. But the children, we'll be fine. Thank you for your help." The older woman gathered her dignity around herself like armor, shot one last disapproving look at the chaos, and marched out with her head held high. In the silence that followed, the boys continued to stare at their father with wary eyes. 2 years of disappointment had taught them not to hope for too much. "You're right," Jonathan said finally. "I did make her go away, and that was wrong." Logan's face crumpled. "She's not coming back, is she?" Instead of answering, Jonathan stepped aside, revealing Nyla standing behind him. The explosion of joy was immediate and overwhelming. Logan launched himself from the counter straight into Nyla's arms, not caring about the 6-foot drop. Noah scrambled to his feet, pots and pans forgotten, racing toward her with tears streaming down his face. Ethan, not to be outdone, attempted to climb down from the refrigerator with more enthusiasm than skill. Nyla caught Logan easily, scooping Noah up with her free arm, reaching out to help steady Ethan as he jumped the last few feet to the floor. In seconds, she was surrounded, overwhelmed, covered in small arms and tearful faces and desperate hugs. "You came back," Logan sobbed into her shoulder. "You came back. I thought we'd never see you again," Noah whispered. Ethan, always the most reserved with his emotions, simply pressed his face against her side and held on tight. "I'm here," Nyla murmured, her own voice thick with tears. "I'm here, babies. I'm so sorry I left." Jonathan watched this reunion with a mixture of joy and heartbreak. This was what he'd almost thrown away. This pure, uncomplicated love between his children and the woman who'd seen past their hurt to the sweet boys underneath. "Are you staying?" Ethan asked, pulling back just enough to look at Nyla's face. "For real this time?" Nyla looked over the boys' heads to meet Jonathan's eyes. In her gaze, he saw questions and hope and the promise of something he'd thought was lost to him forever. "If your daddy wants me to stay," she said carefully. 3 pairs of eyes swiveled to Jonathan with laser focus. He felt the weight of their expectations, their need, their fragile hope that this time, the adults in their lives might choose them over everything else. "I want you to stay," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "We all do. For as long as you'll have us." The smile that broke across Nyla's face could have powered the entire mansion. "In that case," she said, setting Logan and Noah down but keeping her arms around all 3 boys, "I think we have some pancakes to make." 3 weeks later, the Cole mansion had become something Jonathan barely recognized and absolutely loved. The pristine silence had been replaced by the soundtrack of actual life. Children's laughter echoing through halls that had been tomb quiet for 2 years, the sound of running feet on marble floors, conversations over breakfast that lasted longer than the time it took to wolf down food and rush out the door. The boys had transformed too. Not overnight. Nyla had been clear about that from the beginning. Healing takes time. She'd told Jonathan that first night as they'd cleaned pancake batter off nearly every surface in the kitchen. They've been hurting for a long time. It's going to take longer than a few weeks to teach them how to trust again. But the changes were unmistakable. Logan, who'd been the most clingy and anxious since Rebecca's death, had started sleeping through the night in his own bed. He still sought out physical comfort more than his brothers, but it was the healthy kind now. Hugs because he was happy, not because he was terrified of being left alone. Noah, always the quietest, had begun talking more. Really talking about his dreams and his fears and the things he remembered about his mother. He'd started writing stories, fantastic tales about brave knights and magical kingdoms that he shared shyly over dinner. And Ethan, his fierce, angry firstborn, had slowly begun to let his walls down. He still had moments of explosive temper, but they came less frequently now. More importantly, he'd started coming to Jonathan with problems instead of acting out to get attention. The mansion itself reflected these changes. Toys lived in the family room instead of being hidden away in the boys' bedrooms. Art projects covered the refrigerator. Fingerprints smudged windows and walls. And for the first time in 2 years, Jonathan didn't immediately call the cleaning service to erase them. But the biggest change was in Jonathan himself. "You're different," his assistant commented one afternoon, looking up from her tablet with surprise. "You just turned down a merger meeting to go to Logan's school play." She was right. 6 months ago, Jonathan would have sent a nanny to the play and thought nothing of it. Now, the idea of missing any moment of his children's lives felt unthinkable. "The merger can wait," he said, straightening his tie. "My son only gets one chance to be a tree in the first-grade production of The Forest Friends." Nyla had done that to him. Somehow, without lectures or ultimatums, she'd shown him what he'd been missing. Not through words, but through her own example of being present, of listening, of treating his children like they were the most important people in the world. Because to her, they were. The challenges hadn't disappeared. Margaret Cole still made disapproving comments about the situation whenever she visited, though she'd stopped making them directly to Nyla after a particularly frosty conversation with her son. The gossip blogs still occasionally ran photos of the billionaire's unconventional household, but the novelty had worn off quickly when no scandal materialized. More difficult were the internal adjustments. Jonathan had spent 2 years building walls around his grief, and learning to let someone else in, really in, was harder than he'd expected. "You don't have to be perfect, you know," Nyla had told him one evening after he'd snapped at Noah for spilling juice on his laptop. "I'm not trying to be perfect." "Yes, you are. You're trying to be the perfect father, the perfect boss, the perfect man. And when you can't manage all three, you get frustrated and take it out on the people who love you most." She was right, of course. She was right about most things, which was both wonderful and occasionally maddening. So what do? You do what the rest of us do. You mess up, you apologize, and you try again tomorrow. Simple advice, but revolutionary for a man who'd built his empire on never showing weakness. The real test came on a Friday evening in November. Jonathan had been looking forward to a quiet dinner at home, something that had become precious to him over the past few weeks, when his phone rang. Marcus Williams from the community center, his voice tight with worry. "Jonathan, I need your help. We've got a situation here, and Nyla, she's in over her head." 20 minutes later, Jonathan walked into the community center to find controlled chaos. Police cars outside, social workers huddled in conversations, and in the center of it all, Nyla holding a little girl who couldn't have been more than 4 years old. "What's happening?" Jonathan asked Marcus quietly. "Domestic violence situation. Mom's in the hospital, Dad's been arrested, and little Sophia here doesn't have anywhere to go." Marcus rubbed his face tiredly. "Foster system's overloaded, and she's traumatized enough without being placed with strangers tonight." Jonathan looked at Nyla, saw the protective set of her shoulders, the gentle way she was murmuring to the frightened child. "She wants to take her home, doesn't she? She wants to keep her safe. There's a difference." But Jonathan understood the distinction. Nyla wasn't trying to play savior or make some grand gesture. She simply couldn't bear the thought of a scared child spending the night with strangers when there was another option. The social worker, a harried-looking woman with kind eyes, approached them hesitantly. Ms. Washington, I understand your concern, but unless there's a suitable placement available, there is. The words came out of Jonathan's mouth before he'd fully thought them through, but he didn't take them back. Mr. Cole, the social worker began, this is a very serious responsibility. I understand that. But I have a large house, resources, and 3 boys who could probably use a reminder of how lucky they are. Jonathan looked at Nyla, saw the gratitude and love in her eyes. More importantly, I have someone who knows how to help scared children feel safe again. The paperwork took 2 hours. The drive home was quiet, with Sophia sleeping in Nyla's arms and Jonathan's mind racing with the implications of what he'd just committed to. What would his boys think? What would his mother say? What did he know about caring for a traumatized 4-year-old girl? But when they walked through the front door and Logan immediately whispered, "Is she okay? Can we help her feel better?" Jonathan knew they'd made the right choice. That night, as they tucked all 4 children into makeshift beds in the family room, Sophia had been too frightened to sleep alone. Nyla caught Jonathan's hand. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for not making me choose between helping her and being here. Thank you for showing me what choosing really means." They stood there in the doorway, watching 4 children sleep peacefully under their protection, and Jonathan felt something settle deep in his chest. This was what family looked like. Not perfect, not conventional, but real and warm and filled with love. If you made it to the end, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. It truly means the world to us. See you in the next one.